Okay, so on this graph here, what we're going to do is we're going to graph both the sine and the cosine graph. Because remember, the sine over the cosine is the tangent. So let's start by putting the sine graph on. Okay, so we're going to start sine. Positive sine starts at 0, and then let's do it normally. Positive sine starts at 0, and it ends at 0 at pi over 2. And then in the middle, you're at 0. And then in the middle of the first half, you're up at a positive, so at pi over 2, you're at positive 1. And then in the middle here, you're down at negative 1. So here is your first part of your sine. There's the first half of your sine. Second half, first half of the second half. And then there's the end part. Now when you try to sketch this, try to make this as much of this curve as possible. You want to try to make that look as nice as possible so that when we divide these, it comes out as accurately as possible. Okay? Now let's fill in the negative part here. Negative pi over 2 will be at negative 1. At negative pi, you'll be at 0. At negative 3 pi over 2, you'll be at positive 1. And at negative 2 pi, you'll be back at 0. Okay? So the blue here is the sine graph. Okay? Now, let me put the cosine graph on here. Cosine, I'm going to do in red. So cosine, I'm going to do in red. So here, cosine we know starts at positive 1. At pi over 2, we're at 0. At pi, we're at negative 1. At 3 pi over 2, we're back at 0. And at 2 pi, we're back at positive 1. Okay? Okay. Now we're going to do this to the negatives as well. So at negative pi over 2, we'll be back at 0. At negative pi, we'll be at negative 1. At 3 pi over 2, negative 3 pi over 2, we're back at 0. And at negative 2 pi, we're back at positive 1. Okay, so now we're ready to get our tangent, because remember the tangent equals the sine divided by the cosine. So let's actually divide the values. So tangent, we're going to take the sine value, which is blue. We have 0 divided by 1. Okay, so if you have 0 divided by 1, what do you get? You get 0. So our first point for the tangent will be 0. Okay. Our next value, let's do this at pi over 2. At pi over 2, we have the blue, which is at 1, and our red, which is at 0. So we have 1 divided by 0. Uh-oh, we're dividing by 0. Well, we know we're not allowed to divide by 0. So that means this is undefined. Okay? Well, undefined creates what in math we call an asymptote. Okay? So that's going to be a gap in our graph. There's going to be a spot where you can't have any value of x. And that's signified by a dashed line. So at pi over 2, we have this vertical dashed line in our graph, and this is called an asymptote. Okay? It's a value of x where there is no defined value of y. Okay? So our graph doesn't exist at that point. Okay? So let's go back then to this point. This point here was actually pi over 4. It's halfway between 0 and pi over 2. It's pi over 4. And what looks like it's happening right there? Looks like the red and the blue, at least if you sketched your graph as neatly as possible, looks like they are the exact same value. Well, And it looks like it's about 3/4 of the way up. And actually, pi over 4, and our graph is 45 degrees. Okay, now 45 degrees, or pi over 4, remember that from 45, 45, 90-degree triangles. What is that value? It's square root of 2 over 2. Okay, so this is square root of 2 over 2. Well, if you take square root, oops, let me just write it down here. If you take square root of 2 over 2 and divide it by square root of 2 over 2, when you divide a value by itself, what do you get? You get 1. So at this value, at pi over 4, our tangent value is 1. So what's going to happen here is our graph's going to go from 0 through positive 1, and then it's going to approach this asymptote. But it's never going to, it's never going to cross it. It's just going to go up, and it's going to get closer and closer and closer and closer, but it's never going to touch it. Okay? So now let's go the opposite direction. Let's see if we run into another asymptote this way. Well, here this is negative pi over 4. And if you notice here, it looks like the red and the blue, the sine and the cosine, again, looks like it's at the same value, but one's positive, one's negative. Well, you divided positive square root of 2 over 2 by negative square root of 2 over 2, you would get negative 1. So here, we're going to be at negative 1. Okay. Now, if we go to negative pi over 2, we're taking the blue, which is negative 1 divided by 0. So negative 1 divided by 0, that's going to be undefined again. So we have another asymptote. Okay. So what's going to happen here is the graph's going to come, it's going to go through negative 1, and it's going to go down. This here is one cycle of the tangent graph. Okay. Now this pattern is going to continue to repeat. If we look at the next interval, they look like they're the same but opposites. So again, we're going to be at negative 1. Then here we've got 0 divided by 1, which is 0. At the next one, looks like they're the same again. So you've got the same number divided by itself. So that's going to get you positive 1. So that's up here, positive 1. And then over here, let me get rid of this. Here we've got 0 and 1. We've got 1, actually negative 1 divided by 0, because we're doing sine divided by cosine. Negative 1 divided by 0, well, can't divide by 0, so there's your next asymptote. Okay, so again, our graph's going to come. It's going to approach the asymptote this way, and then it's going to come up and approach the asymptote that way. So this is your tangent graph.